Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is the last panel of the day, so I don't know what we're standing between right now, but I don't think the party tonight starts until well after the conclusion of this panel. But really excited to be here on such a great topic. I'm Beth Kigel. I am a vice president at HNTB, and HNTB is an engineering consulting firm, and we work with transportation agencies, airports, and cities, counties, and states for their visioning, planning, design, overseeing, the actual execution of projects, among other things. I happen to be a national practice consultant focused almost entirely on emerging mobility, so it's a real honor and a pleasure to be here on this particular topic, advanced air mobility, with such an austere panel this afternoon. And all of us here on the stage, we are immersed in one way or the other in the area of advanced air mobility, and we often refer to those of us that are involved as we're all part of the ecosystem of advanced air mobility, and we've got a pretty great representation of the ecosystem here today. And many don't realize the level of activity that has been occurring over the past few years to really launch advanced air mobility services. Some people refer to them as air taxis, some refer to them as electric vehicle takeoff and landing for passengers, but the ecosystem includes those actual aircraft or vehicles, airspace management systems, infrastructure, regulation, and other supportive services that will actually help bring this to fruition. So we have great representation. We have federal government, we have county government, and we have two members of the private sector up here. There was a great workshop earlier today. I was just a participant observer in the workshop where we had all of our panelists and more participating in that. It was really great, and I'm sure that will add a little bit of flavor to our discussions today. I don't know if any of you in the audience were at that workshop, but it was really great. So without further ado, I just want to briefly introduce our panelists. We have with us right here to my right, we have Starr Ginn, who is the Advanced Air Mobility Lead Strategist for NASA. Next to her, we have Vice Chairman Oliver Gilbert of the Miami-Dade County Commission. He is also chair of the Miami-Dade County TPO, which many of you know the term MPO. So we're happy to have Vice Chairman Gilbert here. We also have Dr. Valerie Manning, who is the Chief Commercial Officer of Overair, who's one of our eVTOL developers, as well as Matthew Land, Eve Air Mobility. It's just a pleasure to have Matthew on another panel that I'm moderating along with Oliver, another one of our eVTOL OEMs. So that being said, I think I'd like to give them each a couple of minutes to talk about their organizations and kind of where they fit within this ecosystem. So Starr, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. So Starr Ginn at NASA. I've been at NASA for 26 years now at the Armstrong Flight Research Center. So that's, if anybody's seen the movie The Right Stuff, the first half of that movie is done at Edwards Air Force Base, and that's where we fly one-of-a-kind airplanes. So it's a really exciting job. And I personally am a pilot, and I live on a sky park. And when I got wind of, hey, we might be able to electrify airplanes and make air taxis, I thought, I want everybody to have what I have, which is this on-demand capability right in my backyard. So that was really my motivation to push. I'd say I'm one of maybe, and you can count on one hand how many NASA zealots there were that advocated for electric aircraft, specifically distributed electric propulsion, and what it could bring new transportation opportunities to the world. So NASA's role always has been to buy down risk to help industry be successful. So we take the really early TRL ideas and we try to prove, like, just are they going to work or are they not going to work? And so it's just as good to find out if they're not going to work because we don't waste a bunch of people's time. And we usually try to bring small businesses along with us or even large OEMs along with us because at some point that technology needs to transfer into industry and become a product for somebody. And so we're trying to make sure the United States is staying number one in innovation and technology. So for us to get into electric airplanes was an opportunity to say, you know, where's the gaps? Because you can't just take stuff from a car and move it into an airplane, it's too heavy. And so there's a lot of redesign of components that people had experience with, had to get done and become robust for an aircraft environment. The other important piece of having a government entity involved is that we will publish all of our work because we're paid by the taxpayers. And so that kind of level sets the ground for everybody, so the market doesn't get cornered by just any one individual company. It's been a struggle in the last couple of years to get, everybody's holding their cards really close to their chest because there's a lot of venture capital money out there to be had. And it can't go around to everybody. So we try to do our own experimentation instead of like working with the specific companies so that we can publish results and level set the industry on where people should be concerned around safety. Really is what we're mainly focused on. But we went from the vehicle to the whole ecosystem. So we have research in vehicles, technologies, and also in airspace integration, and also infrastructure, and a lot of work in automation, because that is going to be a key to close the loop on this new transportation system. So I'll just leave it there.
Well, it's great to have NASA on the panel, because I know in talking to members of the public and others and educating them about this, they say, why would NASA even be involved in this? Because they think of rockets, right, and shuttles and things of that nature. So it's always good to give a little bit of a flavor to understand NASA's role in all this. Vice Chairman Gilbert, how about you?
Thank you, Beth. I'm Oliver Gilbert. I'm the Vice Chairman for the Board of County Commissioners in Miami-Dade County. I'm also currently the Chair of the TPO, the Transportation Planning Organization. I guess within the context of this space, local government, Miami-Dade County, is trying to find a way to enable the creation, the birth, the operation of this industry. It's something that's brand new. It's something that's brand new, and so we don't have the luxury of already having roads in place like they did when we started to license ride shares and stuff like that. We have to figure out where they land, where they take off, how that's as least disruptive as it can be to our residents. We have to try to ensure safety as much as we can, and not less than all of that is we have to find a way to make it business friendly. And so I sponsored the item to actually create the working group, and we invited the industry in, help us look at how we do this, help us draft the regulations, help us figure out how we become one of the first people who are first to market. And so I think that's important. I think it's important for Miami-Dade County. I think it's important for America. And so that's generally how I operate in this space. But beyond that, it's interesting that as we talk about flying trucks or cars or vehicles, and they're electric and they're vertically lifting up and taking off, there's something greater that we all are doing. We're actually teaching people how to dream a little again and imagine a little again. When I grew up, you had stuff like the Jetsons, and you remember that cartoon, and so we're going to be able to do that. We can do that. Sometimes we forget how extraordinary we can be. How extraordinary we have extraordinary pilots and engineers and coders. If we can imagine it and you give us enough time, enough resources, we can build it, we can be transformative. And so I think this is one of those things that does that. And so sometimes when you're in the middle of history, you don't actually understand what your place in history is. Like when people were actually just out there and they were nailing down spikes, going from the East Coast to the West Coast. They didn't know they were actually helping build a country, a continent. So you don't realize what it is you're doing now, but what you're doing in the creation of an industry, the creation of a new mode of transportation, is actually transformative in ways that will speak to more than our transportation and transit needs. And so I think it's important that we encourage, and we do that not just as a private sector or public sector, but through our national consciousness. And I think we're doing that. Thank you, Beth.
That's great, Vice Chairman. And I didn't mention before when I was introducing myself that I happen to live in Miami, and it's really wonderful to have a leader like Vice Chairman Gilbert who's so visionary in this regard. So it makes all of us feel really good about where we're going within our county. Valerie, how about you next?
Yeah, so first, Overair. Overair is an electric vertical takeoff and landing, so eVTOL, company where we're developing and producing our vehicle actually right here in Southern California in Santa Ana down the road. And if you've been out here and you see the big propeller on the truck and the model out there, well, that's our full-scale propulsion test bed that we are using to prove out our propulsion system. So to put it into context, we are a vehicle that carries, it's piloted that carries pilot plus 5 passengers plus luggage. And with many applications, including urban mobility. So it fits within the AAM, Advanced Air Mobility context. Myself, I'm the Chief Commercial Officer, so I've been just with a couple of months with the company with really an interest, having a long background in aviation, with really an interest of being part of this innovative, this disruption that we're going through in aviation right now, and a sustainable disruption being now being very quiet, low carbon emission or no carbon emission on the aircraft, and really part of a new ecosystem, which is what I'm really learning a lot more about at organizations like CoMotion. So, and I also have a personal interest, also being a pilot, and wanting to understand how we can really contribute and align ourselves with the existing modes of transportation in and around cities.
Matthew, you're up next.
Told them to turn your mic off, Matt.
I didn't turn anything on or off.
Want to borrow mine?
Okay,
You.
share.
Yeah, check. Okay. Matthew Land, leading government relations and public policy for eVTOL mobility. You know, all of our time is extremely valuable, and we all deserve to have safe and reliable transportation options, and to be able to have many different transportation options. At EVE, we are developing the solutions that can enable urban air mobility operations to exist. We are excited to be developing an electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, as well as some of the other solutions, including the air traffic management component. You know, we're very excited to be considered an ecosystem integrator in this space. When I say that, I mean that we are not operating our aircraft like some of our other peers in this space. We're selling and leasing our aircraft only. We have the largest public order backlog in the industry, having sold more than 2,700 aircraft across all of the world to 26 customers. You know, we're really starting to think about and coming to this kind of critical juncture, and I think this panel is so very timely, you know, easing the pain point for how we are going to have advanced air mobility operations. You know, we're really reaching that point where we need to be thinking about all the different ecosystem elements and how they're all going to be working together. In leading government relations and public policy for the company, I get to work with local governments, airport authorities, folks from the private sector and others from the public sector at all levels of government to really be thinking this through and figure out what we need to do to be ready for day one operations. So very excited to get the conversation underway, Beth.
Well, I just want to mention one thing because you were talking about, you know, the purchase of the aircraft. And I just wanted to share with everyone, because I don't know how many of you are familiar, but there are a number of our airlines, major airlines, that are making major commitments to purchase eVTOL aircraft for airport shuttle services in the future. And to many of us, that really shows just the credibility as well as some validity to what's going to be happening in the future in the area of advanced air mobility as one particular use case of that. So I want to come back and talk a little bit more about roles and talk about government role and private sector role in ensuring that we have this integrated into our transportation network and we can have, you know, a efficient, effective launch of this new third dimension in mobility. So I want to start with government first, perhaps the federal government, and start with you, Starr. I mean, I know you're with NASA, but federal government overall, what kind of roles does the federal government play? I mean, there's NASA, there's FAA, but I'd also like it if you could touch a little bit on the national campaign too, because I'm not sure everyone is aware of the national campaign.
Yes, so NASA has a history of working closely with the FAA. FAA doesn't particularly have a research arm, so usually it's NASA and industry that are thinking of something, you know, new that we want to put on an airplane, and we help kind of shape what the safety case looks like and hand that over as an example that we're publicly willing to share, that the FAA can consider how they would put policy in place for something like that, whatever the technology happens to be. So, you know, with National Campaign, that's headquarters said, you know, there's a lot of hype for advanced air mobility, and we really need to kind of put our finger on the readiness level of where everybody is, and that'll help us focus or figure out where there's gaps that we need to put our resources into that aren't being resourced. And so the idea was, you know, vehicle, aerospace infrastructure companies, you know, come, you know, give us a proposal, and we'll do the integration part, and we won't worry about like getting anything certified yet. So the FAA doesn't have to be involved, because NASA has their own airworthiness process that we can do to do real flight demonstrations of the system. And so it was, you know, pretty quickly realized that the industry isn't as far along as the hype is. And so which I mean, is fine. It just showed us where we really need to buckle down and put some more resources in. So, for instance, like NASA's done a lot of research in automation, but we've done a lot of that for the military applications. Military has a different kind of airworthiness or certification requirements than civil. So they don't have to have as many 10 to the -9, like, you know, we're flying all this, you know, innocent population. You know, they know they're taking risks and they're fighting in a war, and so standards are a little different. So now we noticed there's a lot of companies that are working on, like, I need to figure out how to build a safe electric airplane, and I know automation is going to be a heavy hitter at some point, but I don't have the bandwidth to do it all in parallel. So we're taking an initiative to develop kind of the end-to-end closed-loop system where you're going to have some automation systems like on the ground and on the airplane that are going to negotiate with each other without a human, in contingency environments. So we're constantly trying to push, what does this ecosystem look like when things go wrong? Not nominal is easy, but what about when it goes wrong? How does automation play a role? This was another really interesting piece about National Campaign was we had to get people to start talking other people's language, right? That's not their own. So we had to get, and even in the FAA, you know, they're very, you know, CERT does this on fixed wing and CERT does this on rotorcraft, and then there's people who do air traffic controllers, and they don't talk to vehicle CERT department. And so we spent a year basically trying to get the FAA to talk to each other about how the changes in vehicle airspace and infrastructure is going to affect them all. And you can't do those in series. So we got, people have never worked together in a room to start talking about, let's talk about the operation. And this is how the vehicle CERT needs to think about the operation. And this is how airspace needs to think about the operation. Anyways, it's all going to be affected to each other. So, you know, we're trying to help move the FAA kind of as fast as you can move the FAA, and while at the same time helping industry, you know, have viable products, I guess. So that's the government role.
Thanks, Starr. And now we'll get a little more local with it, right? Vice Chairman, you're closer to the people. So.
Well, yeah, and I kind of, it reflects, like, our perspective probably reflects something that's close to the people, because how they fly, whether they fly, how much noise they make, those things are going to be done in other places and insured in other places. Ours is going to be, where do they take off and land? How do you get power to them? How do we make sure this is something that's impactful, but is not as disruptive as it otherwise could be? How we do ensure some type of social justice and equity component. This needs to be done fairly in a way that empowers and emboldens all communities. And so those type of things actually happen. But even besides that, one of the things I think that not just local government, but local leaders can do is help translate what's being said about it to people in ways that they can actually digest it. So we can know a whole bunch of stuff and we can say a whole bunch of stuff, but if people don't get it and they don't believe us, it's going to be a problem. So we have to bring the public along with us as we go. If in 2 years we're ready to actually launch the first, lift from Miami International Airport and take it to the beach, that means we should have spent the 18 months prior to that 2-year mark actually talking people through this and walking them through this. When you introduce something to people that's really, really just brand new, something that they haven't actually conceptualized before, part of what the problem is not whether you can actually fly these eVTOLs. That's not the issue. The issue is whether they believe they should be flown. And so we have to start the process of making people believe that the industry should and will exist. We don't want to surprise people with this. Surprising people with this and that type of sudden shock, not only makes it more difficult for you all, but it makes it more difficult for public officials because they don't vote for you. They vote for us. And if they're saying, hey, I don't want these things flying over my houses because they can't be safe, well, that means we haven't done our job to talk to them about all the safety protocols that have been put in place to make sure it's safe. We haven't talked to them about the path that they're going to take and where they're going to land and who they're going to carry. We need to bring them along. People need to be brought along when something is this new and out of the box. We can do that.
So now let's turn to the private sector in terms of your role in all of this. Look, obviously, you're working with all levels of government, right, in order to be sure that this service can launch, right? So would love to have you weigh in terms of your role in helping to make it all possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first thing I'd say is that what our role is not. And our role as eVTOL manufacturers and operators is not to just impose eVTOL on a community. We absolutely, at all levels of government, have to be engaged and already are engaged in having these discussions. Our role is partly to learn and to listen and to be educated, but our role is also to educate. And I think the eVTOL manufacturers, it's interesting you mentioned the airlines. I come from quite a career with Airbus of working with airlines all around the world, day in and day out on their pain points. Why is that aircraft not operating the way they thought it would? What's wrong with it? Why are things not efficient? Why are they not getting this slot? Why is the pilot training not efficient enough? And this sort of thing. With eVTOL right now, there simply are no operators yet. So we have to bring the knowledge we have as aviation, because we still fall under the FAA, and that's good, and we're working with them as well, to bring that down to what does local operation mean? And so that we can understand what are the technical aspects of these aircraft, what are the noise aspects of these aircraft, and really bring some facts so that we can help local governments to educate their local communities. Everybody says they're quiet. Have you heard them? Right? So can we really work through this? So I think it really is cooperating, but we have to learn, and then respectfully, we can help to educate, I believe.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I think Valerie hit on some excellent points. I mean, we need to educate while also learning, right? I think that's exactly right. The private sector doesn't have all of the answers, and the public sector doesn't either. But I think that when we come together collaboratively, that's when we're able to figure out what these solutions are needing to be. I touched upon this a little bit earlier this morning in the workshop. We recently completed a simulation in Chicago, in the entire Chicago region, doing a commuter use case towards downtown Chicago, bringing together those government partners, working with the Department of Aviation, working with the mayor's office and the suburb communities and those councils and things like that, bringing together the private sector and those different ecosystem partners to learn what is it going to take to actually have operations? Figuring out what those challenges are, figuring out where those gaps are at for the Chicago region. And as we think through that, we can certainly apply some of those lessons to different areas, whether that's Los Angeles or whether that's Miami-Dade County, New York, Paris, anywhere else, right? Thinking through what is the ecosystem development needs and what should we be really looking out for. And so I think that's a lot of the role that the private sector is really truly playing right now.
Well, and I just want to say this, just to kind of bring this around full circle, kind of going back to Vice Chairman Gilbert mentioned the Miami-Dade County UAM working group, which is really great because that set the foundation of it's okay for the public and private sector to learn from one another as we go through this process. It was a really great level setting. You know, I'm fortunate to be on the working group as well, and it's been a really good experience. And now I know that's translating into the great work that the TPO is doing under the leadership of Eileen Bouclet, who's sitting there, our executive director, in terms of a framework for Miami-Dade County based on all of this great discussion and education among all parties. So really great process, and looking forward to seeing what fruits those bear as we go forward. So we've talked about some of the concerns and things that have to be addressed. So let's turn to opportunity. So I'm going to start back on the other side of the panel here. We'll start with the private sector first. We're going to give you a chance to be the first voice on this in terms of the opportunity related to bringing this service or modality to the public.
I mean, I think that the number one opportunity this brings is an additional transportation option for residents and visitors alike. I think that, the entire theme of CoMotion this year is multimodal connectivity. And that's something that we really need to be thinking about. And it's an opportunity to integrate this into our existing transit infrastructure that we have in various different cities, and to be really thinking through that and planning it. I think that a lot of people in the industry expect that medical use cases and cargo use cases are going to be very easily adopted by those communities, and to really gain that community acceptance. And certainly just, further from there, the passenger carrying aspect of this. And being able to, like I said, bring another transportation option to everybody. Is everyone going to take this every single day to commute? Some people might, but commuting is a lot of different things. It's people who live down in Kendall and the south part of Miami-Dade County that want to go check out what's going on in South Beach, some hot new restaurant, or somebody who's living in a suburb of Chicago that needs to get to the Illinois Medical District for their yearly exam at their doctor's office, or something like that, right? So there's certainly different ways that people can use this without having to use it every single day. And being able to provide that safe and reliable transportation option is going to be a great opportunity.
Great. Valerie?
Yeah, of course I'd agree. And so just to add on top of that, I think, having this third dimension brings some options and some connectivity to go beyond. This is not only an urban play. It can be a play about connecting difficult to reach places, right? Connecting, even if we're talking at least in the near term, because we're talking all electric, so we're a bit limited by our battery capacity, for example. So even if we're only talking 100 miles is a long way in some cases. It can take a long time to get a short distance if you're talking about going over a canyon, if we're talking about going over a body of water. So there's a lot that we can do in addition to everything you mentioned that I won't repeat. So I think there are quite some options as we think around the world about what we can do in terms of bringing not only a financial benefit, but bringing community benefits and many other benefits as well. So I think in doing all of that in a carbon-free, in a sustainable, in a quiet way, not only about quiet for the urban areas, but quiet for rural areas as well, and quiet for nature. And so I think there is a lot of opportunity for this.
Great. Vice Chairman, would love to hear your perspective.
I enjoyed hearing both of their comments, and when they were speaking, I just, a couple of things popped into my head, and I'm not going to talk about your hair, but no, it's, the beard, no, wash your face, no. It's, so the Model T, when it was created, it was a two-seater that didn't go very far or very fast. And so a lot of times we have this instinct of thinking about things, about how they're happening. I try to think about things about what they can become. And so there will be battery limitations right now, but we have really smart people who are going to work on making those batteries, last a lot longer. This might start at 75 or 100 miles. That's the starting point. That's the starting point. And it might start just carrying 4 or 5 people. We will find ways to evolve that. The nature of our curiosity as human beings makes it so that we're going to keep asking the questions, can we do this better? Can we do this differently? We are going to iterate and innovate. That is what we are going to do. And so the opportunities really are endless. The opportunities aren't just the opportunities of being able to take 4 or 5 people and their luggage from Palm Beach to Miami Airport. The opportunities are being able to have housing in Palm Beach and bring people down almost in buses to downtown Miami, so that now you've expanded the housing area and you've brought down housing prices. It doesn't happen right now. That happens as the industry is born and it evolves and it grows and it matures into what it can be. And so I really think the opportunity in some ways is not imaginable, because we don't know what the tentacles of this thing is going to be. We don't know what type of economic impact it's going to be from a perspective of the industries that are created because of this industry, and who makes money on those industries and the jobs that are created in those industries and the wealth that's generated to those. We don't know that yet. And this is one of those things that we actually have to ask the question and just keep asking questions and keep answering them. And I believe this could be the beginning of something better that we are becoming. And the fact that we are becoming more conscious of the things we do to the planet and how it hurts the planet. And so the fact that this is electric is very, very, very important. I think this could be that special. We just have to stick to it. And that's why I keep going back to, we have to bring people along. The industry staying power will be in large part predicated on whether we can get buy-in. We need to always have buy-in.
Thank you. Starr, anything to add?
I'm going to come up with a very selfish opportunity that I'm looking forward to, and that is I choose not to live in an urban environment because I don't like traffic. And I can get a much more affordable house out in the desert, but I have to travel a lot. And so what is an hour-and-a-half drive to get to LAX, the reality is it's basically a 2.5-hour drive at least when I add traffic to that drive. And then you don't know how bad the traffic's going to be anytime, so you give yourself even more buffer on top of that. So the amount of time that I waste sitting on a freeway is just incredible. And so just if I literally wanted to fly that route from my house to LA, it would probably take 15 to 20 minutes to do that, to fly, because I've done that before. But not, just at least close enough to LA, not actually land there. And that takes, even in a gasoline power aircraft, that's only takes it's probably like $5 of gas to do that. And you go electric, and obviously that price point comes down significantly. But I'm not paying for overhead of a pilot and maintenance and all that kind of stuff that adds on. But anyways, I just think that would be amazing to get people that want to live away from the big hub and spoke airports to be able to get and travel a lot easier.
Great, thank you. All right, I want to talk a little bit brass tacks now, I guess, with our private sector panelists. Because the title of this is Easing Pain Points. And, you have certain commitments that have to be made. I mean, there's major investments being made in your technologies. What needs to happen from your standpoint in order to enable you to have the service launched within the timeframes that you want? And what are the particular pain points that we need to be aware of so that we're also cognizant of those? Because it's win-win scenarios, right, that have to play out in order to make this work. So I'm going to throw this to you and see how you respond to it.
Well, I can say one thing you brought up investment. You need a lot of investment, right? I've been through aircraft certifications before, certification of aircraft modifications, and it is for good reason, a highly regulated industry where safety is key, and that safety has a price, and the technologies that we're bringing in, they have a price. So there is always investment needed, and in terms of financial investment, and yes, investors want to have their return on investment. So really what we have to do in order to encourage that investment is to make sure that this new industry sector is judged on the proper elements, on the proper things, and that we're taking best advantage of the technologies. And I think one other thing we need is really consistent regulation, right? So it's not up to any of us to just decide, oh, we have our vehicle now, we're going to go into service. No, we have to be certified. We have to make sure that, or rather the government has to make sure, the FAA or EASA or other airworthiness authorities around the world, they're the ones who decide when we can fly. And when we can operate. So this is extremely important for us. We need consistent regulation that does not impose undue constraints, right? We don't need segregation from the rest of aviation, and there are many things we can do with that. And then, of course, let's always come back around, and it's not a pain point that's imposed upon us by local governments, but in the end, somebody needs to want to pay to put something inside of these vehicles, let's be honest, right? And we want to make sure we understand what it takes for that to happen in a reasonable way. And that's where we circle back around to the cooperation with the municipalities or the areas in which these aircraft will be operated.
Yeah, I think for Eve, so we're working very closely with our customers to determine what the use cases on how they want to use our eVTOLs and the cities that they want to launch their operations in. Once the aircraft is certified, expected to be in 2025, and hopefully in commercial operations in 2026, that's our expected timeline. Matching that up to those launch cities, we need to make sure that ecosystem is prepared and developed enough so that they can actually fly their aircraft, so they can begin making the money that they need to be making on in their operations. So I think for us, thinking about the ecosystem development is so important right now, and having that kind of deeper level of collaboration from the infrastructure partners, the energy partners, from our city and county governments, making sure that we're all really truly working together. As we think about, the potential routes in a city and where we're going to have that infrastructure at, there's a lot of things that everybody needs to know to be planning for all of that. As infrastructure partners are purchasing land or partnering with local governments to build that infrastructure and whatever that ultimately looks like in those cities, the energy companies need to be prepared to be able to bring the necessary energy to the grid and base that off of demand, but then also the kind of growing expected demand. And so we really need that kind of deeper level of collaboration on everybody's part. If for instance, in Miami-Dade County, if Florida Power and Light needs to bring another transformer to Miami Beach in order to provide that amount of electricity needs for the expected demand over the years, that permitting process could take 6 or 9 months for the city, and then plus they're going to have to actually build it and things like that. So we really need to start working, backwards in that timeline and figure out how do we get there to enable not only day one operations, but so that we can grow and scale safely in the industry.
If I can just add one point to complement. So you see here sitting side by side 2 eVTOL players. So in some ways you may say, oh, they're competitors. First of all, it's not a zero-sum game. And second, we need the same things. And so we're collaborating, many of us are collaborating on, what is the electricity standard, right? What is the vertiport standard? What kind of things make sense? So there's a lot of collaboration among the serious players in eVTOL for this.
Well, I have to say, I think that's very refreshing. I mean, going back to the UAM working group in Miami, I remember a presentation that was done. Matthew, I think you led it, but you pulled all of the eVTOL developers together and you gave a collaborative, cohesive presentation that was very good, very educational, but it speaks to the fact that you understand that by doing that, you can get many things done that will help the industry as a whole. Separately, it's probably going to be very hard to do that. But you did touch on infrastructure, so I want to move to that for a second, or for a couple of minutes, and talk about a couple things related to infrastructure. So first of all, there's been a lot of talk as to what will that infrastructure look like. Are we talking about freestanding vertiports? Are we talking about repurposing parking garages? Are we talking about general aviation facilities and leveraging those? There's been a lot of discussion about what's going to be appropriate, but we've also had discussion about where should these be located and what are the considerations that need to be taken into account. So I guess, Oliver, I'd like to go to you next to talk a little bit more about the where and the considerations. I know we've had amongst ourselves a lot of discussion about this, but then I'd like to, after I talk with you and Starr, I'd like to pivot back to Valerie and Matthew and talk about the, what are the different configurations that maybe you're thinking about.
Let me just first, you mentioned her, Eileen Bouclet, Executive Director of the TPO, is here. Eileen, stand up and wave to the folks there. And Euless Cleckley, you're laughing. You're standing up and waving next. Yeah. He's our director of transit, and it's in Public Works in Miami-Dade County. And the reason why I introduced him now is because she leads the organization that does the transportation planning, and he leads the organization that does the public transportation. And so we're invested in this idea. The question of where, I think the answer is going to be all of the above. And it's going to really depend. I mean, because we're building something from scratch, we can do what makes sense. So some of the stuff might be at airports, but some of the stuff might be, you know, repurposed parking garage, the top roof of parking garages. It just depends on the situation, the need, the needs of the industry. The needs of the industry and our ability to, from a technical perspective, actually get what's needed there. So there's going to be a certain amount of electricity that's needed to recharge these things. How do we get it to the top floor of the parking garage? How do we do that? How can we do that? Where's this parking garage in relation to neighbors? How do we take that stuff into a consideration? But I think those are all the conversations that we have to be having now, because I agree with Matthew on a lot of things, but especially at a point that we really do need to be working back in time from when these things are going to be to market, because it's not going to be easy to build out something that does not exist from scratch. This isn't like how many of you all have baked a cake? So you bake a cake and you can go to Publix and you can buy like a box mix and you can add milk and eggs and you can just bake a cake. That's one thing. This isn't that. This is you figuring out how much flour you need, figuring out how much sugar you need, figuring out how much butter you need, figuring out how many eggs you need, and you don't actually have a recipe. You're doing it from scratch because it's never been done before. And so the first couple of cakes are going to taste like crap. But eventually you'll get it right. I mean, eventually you'll get it right. I mean, eventually, you know, after the cake falls and, you know, it's flat and it was too moist and it was too dry, but you're going to have to practice. And so right now, we're just trying to actually bake a cake from scratch with no recipe and no history of actually having a cake. We're trying to make it taste good.
Well, let me ask you to pivot a little bit on the where question, because we've had a lot of conversation amongst ourselves. It happened in the workshop, talking about community, right? And what considerations need to be taken into account for that, given some of the history that we have, right, with transportation infrastructure and some of the disconnections that have occurred because of that, but also coupled with the opportunity associated with this particular new mode. So can you comment on that for us?
Yeah, we talked about this in the working group, and what we're not going to do is create this industry in a way that burdens underserved and marginalized communities to benefit people who will initially be able to afford this. Because before you scale this isn't something that the average person will necessarily be able to afford every time. So what we're not going to do is that. So what we've learned from just our collective experience is that if we aren't intentional about how we include equitable conversations and conversations of social justice and conversations of reuniting communities and not breaking up communities and conversations of access for all communities, if we're not intentional about that, then it won't actually happen. Because if you're not intentional about that, then the rules of economic supply, demand, who can afford it, you're going to drive, that's going to just be your primary driver. And so we know that there has to be other considerations. I was very encouraged from the conversation this morning because it seems like a lot of folks are actually thinking about that. And I think that you have to think about that from a local perspective. We're going to think about that. So when you come to us and say, hey, this is where I'm going to put my vertiport, we want to know exactly why you're putting it there and how it's to serve all communities and how it doesn't unduly burden some communities. Because those things are going to be very important to us, because we've seen what bad transportation, bad transit, which is well-intentioned from a point A, point B perspective, actually can destroy communities and have adverse effects on communities. And so having an understanding about how that happens means it's incumbent on us, and not just us as elected officials, but us collectively, the industry, the public, the private, to make sure to the greatest extent possible that doesn't happen again. I think we can do it.
Valerie, Matt, what do you think?
I have a kind of a perpendicular question maybe for that. So one thing is about ridership, who has access to that, which we have today. In the cities, there are people who walk, ride their bicycles, can afford to take the bus, can afford to have their own car, take a taxi, have a limousine, and okay, then there's going to be eVTOL, which, to be fair, at the beginning, maybe on the upper end of that, we want to get it down that curve as much as we can. But there's another aspect to community impact, and that is, and it's near and dear to my heart, is that eVTOL, again, these things aren't going far at the beginning, I agree with you. So this is local operations for local people. And if we're talking urban, when we talk in urban communities, let's face it, in the US, we're often talking black and brown people. So we need black and brown pilots, we need black and brown mechanics, we need black and brown operators, and not to the exclusion of others, but there are opportunities as well. If we're talking to be in service in 3, 4, 5 years, what can we do together now to start really attracting at larger numbers than we have today in traditional aviation, right? Still start attracting people to say, look, these are opportunities for you. I mean, if you also see it as an opportunity, I don't want to tell you what you see as an opportunity for your community, but personally, I believe that that can be an option for us.
And that's one of the things that we talked about earlier. You know, I'm going to give him some free publicity here. Barrington Irvin, who has something called the Flying Classroom, he's a young black man who actually flew around the world. And he came back and started training black and brown pilots, and not just pilots, but technicians and engineers and everything that the industry needs. And so we fund him as a county and we support him as a county, but those types of efforts have to be, they have to be supported and bolstered by us. We have to grow that as far as access. And what you'll find is having that type of inclusion, having the picture look different, it will help when you need to sell it to people. If you're selling it with people who are actually working in the field that they're talking about it. So having him talk about eVTOLs in his community will maybe be a lot better than having you talk about eVTOLs in his community.
Matthew, anything else to add to that? Or Starr?
It's never easy to follow the vice chairman at all, period. I mean, I think generally, you know, when we think about infrastructure, I think, you know, Valerie, I think you made some excellent points, and so did you, Vice Chairman. You know, I think that as we think about what we're going to have initially, right, I think general aviation airports are certainly going to be useful. I think the industry generally believes that those are going to be some of the first places where we're going to have some vertiports. Utilizing existing infrastructure or underutilized infrastructure, for sure. I think there's some elements that the private sector is going to need to invest in, and we're certainly seeing it happen already. Where they are finding commercially viable spaces to build a vertiport. They need to be able to demonstrate to the public sector that this is something that the public sector should also be involved in as well. You know, I think that we're going to certainly see a level of public and private partnerships come out, whether there is you know, underutilized land that Miami-Dade County has that could be in a great location that could service the community, and where there would be demand for urban air mobility operations. Certainly, I think, you know, we're going to see a lot of different things. You know, it's going to be very much a you know, crawl, walk, run approach. I think that's something that everybody talks about, but existing infrastructure, you know, repurposing other infrastructure. You know, you mentioned rooftop parking garages earlier. Certainly being able to convert those and use those. I think that even as we think further along, we're going to see different types of infrastructure. In Chicago, we tried out 3 different types of infrastructure at each one of our different points. We had Vertiport Chicago, which is a you know, kind of full-fledged aircraft hangar, and you know, had multiple FATOs and taxi stands. In the village of Schaumburg, we used a Tesla, and we said, listen, this is what's going to protect you from the elements, or if you need somewhere to cool off and have a bottle of water while you're waiting for you know, the helicopter, which is simulating the eVTOL journey. And then up in over in the village of Tinley Park, we repurposed a container that had a small lounge inside of it. And so as we think about what infrastructure is going to look like in the future, we're going to have, you know, vertiports with multiple stands. We're going to have, you know, neighborhood vertistops where it's not going to be much infrastructure that's there, but it's going to be where people are wanting to have them and where the demand is going to be for that.
So when you mentioned a container, that made me think of something that Dawn had mentioned in our prep call. Starr, I'm sorry, Starr, NASA, right, goes together. But you had mentioned portable vertiports, and that being really beneficial to help, you know, pushing the cause forward. So Starr, is it?
Yeah, So I've over the last, I don't know, 5 years, there's been a lot of workshops that talk about infrastructure. And when you talk to, say, SoCal Edison, they say, well, if we need to, create more power, say, charging stations where the substation can't handle it, it'll take us, 5 years, basically, to redesign the substation and then implement the changes. And then once we've gotten that far, then it's like $1 million per mile to put pipe in the ground to the location where you need that additional power. And so that's a significant investment. And, I've talked to another company who said, I just put one helipad in, just the concrete. It's like no power or surveillance, $450,000 worth. That's a big investment for a piece of concrete. Now, can you imagine that you went to all that work and thinking ahead, and then you start these operations at the place you thought was going to be ideal, and then the community's just like, I don't want this here. The community decides they don't want that here. And that's what happened to our friends who put in that $450 piece of concrete, or $1,000 concrete. It was next to their headquarters, and then a retirement home went up not far from them after the fact and shut down the use of that heliport. So that's just wasted concrete, $450,000. So the community, we're really lagging getting the community involved in this, and so we need to be portable so that we can kind of test out communities before we really make like billions of dollars of investment to put permanent infrastructure in. And also, I think everybody has this idea with electric cars that airplanes are going to pull up to electric charging station. If you're going to have any density of operations, that's not what's going to happen. If you go to LAX, you'll see there's a truck that pulls up to every airplane and fuels it, right? You're going to have, some energy storage sitting on a truck that goes around and charges vehicles, and then it goes and actually finds a substation that already has the capacity that it needs to charge itself and not have to put in additional charging stations or substations, redesigns, and piping electricity. To me, that's a much more efficient way of doing it until you really know you have the investment or the cadence, or you're going to make enough money to put in that kind of infrastructure. So we've been investing in portable charging, different kinds of energy storage solutions. One in particular is nano-electroflow cells, which are not explosive. There's no way for them to ignite, and you can put the positive and negative together, and you have a couple of degrees temperature change. They can actually put out a fire if their liquids, became exposed, and they're not harmful. So I'm really excited about that company. They also have a solution for electric aircraft as well. So we got that in a truck, but we've also been putting out solicitations for portable vertiport, meaning like I can truck it in a trailer, and the load capacity is whatever, the trucking road loads are. And it has all of the weather and surveillance needed to do a certifiable IFR landing to the helipad, because you're going to need that level of safety. They don't have to be flying in weather, but they really need to have the safety and precision of what it takes an aircraft to be equipped to do IFR kinds of operations. So I think that's a great starting point to just kind of work the community into this space.
That's great, Starr. And Vice Chairman, I know there was more you needed to say and wanted to say. So I'm going to give you the last word because we're coming to conclusion here. So, but not yet, because we're going to do our lightning round that I promised we're going to do, which is I'd really like to ask everyone on the panel in 30 or so seconds. We've talked about a lot. There might be something that we didn't cover. 30 or so seconds, what is something that you would like to leave this audience with? And Vice Chairman Gilbert, you're getting the last word, so hold on there for just a second. Matthew, we'll start with you.
I don't know that we talked enough about, community engagement. I think that's really, really, really important to this entire industry. I think we kind of touched upon it in different areas, but it's so important that the community is accepting of what it is that we are trying to do here. I think that by having that level of input, it's going to help benefit the entire industry.
Great. Valerie?
I think in addition to the regulation and the investment, we need, again, education, and also to say what eVTOLs are not. People are worried about drones spying on them over their house. eVTOLs are not that. People do not like the noise of a helicopter flying over. eVTOL are not that. We're really here to demonstrate, give examples, and really, again, bring the community in with us so that we help enhance community acceptance.
Thank you, Valerie. Starr?
So this is something that we all can relate to today, which is pilot shortage. So we already have a pilot shortage, and now we're going to have hundreds of new aircraft that people do not want to spend a decade to get 1,500 hours accrued to become a commercial pilot to fly an eVTOL. And so when I was talking about automation, half of that has to do with we need the airplane to be smarter and do some of the things for the pilot so it's easier to drive like a car. And any of us should be able to get in it and it be very intuitive of how to take off the airplane and then go land it somewhere. And just think about all the automation features we're starting to get on our cars now to help us make better decisions. When we're not making the right decision, the car is helping us make better decisions. That's a big concern to get this industry off.
Thank you, Starr. And Vice Chairman Gilbert.
I would just add this point that sometimes when we talk about social justice and particular industries and being equitable, like it doesn't have to have anything to do with airplanes or eVTOLs. So if you're going to be buying land for a vertiport, use a local real estate agent from that community, not just your national people or your in-house people. There are different ways to be inclusive that sometimes people don't look at. And then I would just leave you all with this. Look, there are two major quotes in my office back in the district. One of them is, the bold don't live forever, but the timid don't live at all. Be bold in everything you do. You got one real shot. And the other is, tomorrow is undefeated. Sometimes we forget that innovation and imagination ultimately win. So what you're doing in this room, what you're trying to create, what you are creating is going to happen. It is going to be transformative, and it is going to change the world. You just have to believe and keep working. Thank you.
I knew that was the best way to close this panel out. Thank you so much. And let's thank all of our panelists. I want to thank CoMotion, John, Tim, and everyone for having us, and I guess we'll see everybody this evening.